Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me take this opportunity to thank Forum for Integrated National Security for inviting me to deliver this lecture. I think second lecture under the aegis of Quad Desk. Looking at the profile of the audience today, I've decided to restrict my talk only to my own research findings. Now, Quad is nothing new. We are all aware about it. In 2007, when Shinzo Abe of Japan talked about Quad, it was not received with great enthusiasm. In fact, when China disgruntled and did muscle flexing, under Prime Ministership of Root, Australia went out of Quad. Later on, when Root was replaced by Gillard as Prime Minister, Australia rejoined in 2010. But Quad received the filling actually in 2017, when on the sidelines of Asia in Manila, the heads of the state met and discussed Quad. Now people started discussing whether it is for trade, it is for people-to-people dialogue, it is for technology transfer, and more recently, of course, the resilience of global supply chain. People are talking about various aspects, but it is very clear that Quad actually is positioned against China, and Quad actually is a security aspect. Now, what is not clear is what would be the architecture of Quad, whether it will be something like United Nations. People say that it would be like United Nations, and these four nations would be the Security Council. People talked about Quad being something like NATO alliance, and this would start Cold War 2.0. And this is where India's role primarily comes into picture. We are very clear that we do not want to sacrifice our strategic autonomy, and we do not want to antagonize either Russia or Iran. Russia and Iran teaming up with China is the last thing that India would want today. And we have goofed as far as both the countries are concerned once in a while. What has happened with Iran, for example? In 2003, when your Booz Allen consultants talked about string of pearls, they were essentially talking about China developing ports in Indian Ocean region, primarily for their securing sea lines of communication. But at times of eventuality, that could be used against India to choke India as well, and we have to be concerned about it. China developed Djibouti near Africa. China developed Gwadar, then Hambantota, Chittagong. We're talking about Kaipiu, and a whole lot of other places. China is having their hegemony. Now, India is not also keeping quiet. India is well aware about her strengths as far as Andaman Nicobar is concerned, and the Malacca dilemma. But if Kra Canal is developed or done through Thailand, then perhaps Malacca dilemma may not remain as it is today. But India has Sitaway, India has Mozambique as close to India, Oman, Dukam, yes or no. But Alagela is another place. We are talking about your Maldives. India is very close to, and therefore India is doing a bit. But the most important advantage India has today is Chaban from Iran. Chaban is important for two reasons. Number one is Chaban is very close to Gwadar, and therefore we can check them at times of eventuality. And second thing is that through Chaban, Iran, and through Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia, India could have an easy access. But the question is that how have we secured our interest there? In 2008, ONGC Videsh found that in the Persian Gulf on the Iran side, there's a huge stock of your natural gas, and we call it Farhad B. There's 23 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and which can be 60% recovered. We entered into the deal, but then we buckled down under the Western pressure. There were 3 presidents of the United States changed, from Bush, then Obama, then Trump, and still the thing has not materialized. For our beat is where it is. And then we started blaming Iran. We said that Iran is not cooperating, and therefore we have spent $400 million there, but we have not made any dent in the project. We reduced the price offered to Iran from 4 billion to 3 billion. We also reduced the, to keep up pressure, we reduced the oil taken from Iran by 20%. Iran reacted, Iran reduced the credit terms from 90 days to 60 days, and eventually the deal got crossed. And a local company started developing that, as well as the railway lines of Chabhar. Now, a prominent minister of India commented that India does not mind losing this contract altogether. What it has resulted into is straining the relationship with Iran. And what happens is, in international relations, such comments are taken very, very seriously. So we lost the deal. The trade with Iran came down from $70 billion to $3.5 billion last quarter. And therefore, Iran is saying that Chabhar is open for China as well. Iran is saying that Chabhar is not against Gwadar or China, and we lost a major important ally there. So can we afford to do that in future? And therefore, my proposition is that we should maintain our strategic autonomy and should not get buckled down by the Western pressure too much. Having said that, it is very clear that this Quad is very clearly positioned against China. Should India join a kind of a group where we are positioned against China? Here, borrowing from Mersheimer, I have some assumptions and a proposition and a conclusion. My assumption number 1 is that the international system is anarchic, in the sense that it does not have a ruler, or it does not have a centralized control. That's number 1. Number 2, in the international system, every state is on its own, and therefore every state has to protect one's own interest. Number 3, every state therefore has some offensive and some defensive capabilities. And number 4, therefore, every state, or any state, for example, can gauge the capacity of other states. But finding out intentions is very, very difficult. During the Cold War, for example, United States and Soviet Union had little problem identifying the strength of each other, but the intention was something which was very difficult to gauge. And at that point of time, therefore, every state has to amass power. How much power? It depends upon the distribution of power. And why power? Because if you want to protect yourself in any region and the world system is anarchic, you do not know the intentions of your adversaries, then in that case, you have to amass so much power that you are at the top in the region. Now, having said that, therefore it is very obvious that any regional power or status quo power would not like any other power to come near us, because in that case, that regional power will get entangled in the same region itself and will never become a global power. And this is, in my opinion, what is happening with China. China is a regional power. They have already gained momentum as far as the economy and hard power and soft power is concerned. Economic power, of course. And therefore, China would not like to accommodate India. China would definitely like India to be would not like India to come up to China. Otherwise, China will get involved in the local politics itself and will not be able to make a global politics. And therefore, it is important that we have to contain China, and we have to join a group like Quad, where it is positioned against China. I'm talking about balancing and bandwagoning in the Indo-Pacific region. Balancing, as you know, is aligning with others against the prevailing threat. We are doing balancing. Having Quad is a balancing act against China, and bandwagoning is aligning with the source of danger itself. And we have witnessed that in past there are many players who have sort of bandwagoned with China. You can, whether it is private greed, you call it checkbook diplomacy, or out of sheer fear. Even Philippines was for some time, sort of trying to align their interests with China, even after winning the ICJ case. Now you can look at Nepal, you can look at Sri Lanka. All these nations have toyed with bandwagoning with China. And my proposition is, if we do not balance with our allies and quickly, and with the smaller states in the Indo-Pacific region quickly, then bandwagoning is inevitable. So what I'm saying is that all models are wrong and some are useful. I'm using some of the useful models in the arena of agent-based modeling primarily. Now, I have considered here the perceived power of various states: India, China, US, and Japan. Now, this is not the actual power. Perceived power, I have quantified the hard power, the soft power, the economic power, that multiplied by the clarity of the objective and willingness to use this power to achieve that objective. And you can see that China scores very well on utilizing power to achieve that objective and clarity of the objective. You can see that the US and China are very close, and the gap between them in terms of perceived power, I'm not talking about actual power, but in terms of perceived power, the gap between US and China is very close. Now, therefore, the relationship is likely to remain very, very strained between these two nations. India and Japan has to cooperate with US at this point of time. My second inference is that Chinese soft power and Chinese economic power is likely to erode in future. However, China is likely to flex its muscle and use coercive hard power to lure the states for bandwagoning, and therefore balancing becomes all the more important. Well, on this basis, I have tried to do some kind of a scenario building. We know that in this kind of a complex situation, and world order is essentially complex, we cannot have a singular future. No? We have multiple futures, and our strategy has to have multi-future robustness in that, so that we accommodate all the possible futures. And in this kind of an uncertain world or complex world, we are able to flex our power. Now, I have used cross-impact analysis as for scenario building, and use the Scenario Wizard 4.2 software. What happens here is three important futures emerge. They vary in terms of the climate change policies. They vary in terms of what you have is the internal security of China, and it varies in terms of the dominance of Communist Party of China. But what is common in all three of them, essentially, is that China is likely to use coercive diplomacy and hard power to bandwagon the smaller states. So China foreign policy is likely to be more and more coercive in future, despite any kind of a scenario. Then I used complexity science here. And this is a game in NetLogo, which is called Heroes and Cowards. Now, this is a situation today where there are very few heroes and more cowards. This is just nomenclature, but what it means is essentially the hawks versus does. And as there are more number of does, this world system is likely to be very, very unstable. This is a very, very unstable situation to begin. Now, this is where I went on, kept on increasing the hops and reduced dose, and this becomes a stable system. What it means is that if there are more number of dose and more number of people who are sort of strong enough to stand against an enemy, especially in Indo-Pacific region, then the world system is likely to be more and more stable. And now I have increased the hops furthermore. And what it appears is that if there are just too many hops, then also the system becomes unstable. So there has to be an optimum number of hops versus dose, and there has to be a balance between the states which are trying to stand up to China. Can we have a next slide? And then on this basis, I propose that we must have more and more balancing so that more and more states stand up against China. We have seen that Indonesia did it once. We have seen that Philippines is doing it now. South Korea, the president is bidding. President bidding today. Something may emerge out of it. But what is important for us here to see is that more and more states are willing to stand up against China. Now, this is a situation which is called brinksmanship game. India and China, and this is what we have observed in Galwan. This is what we have observed in Ladakh. What has happened is that supposing there are two motorcycle riders, okay, approaching each other, and if both of them looking at each other give way to others, the payoff is 0-0. Okay, so both of them are saved and nobody gains anything. If one, supposing China gives way to does not give way to India, and India moves aside, then China's gain is 10, India's gain is -10. Similarly, if India remains steadfast and China gives way to India, then it is -10-10. And if nobody blinks, then there is a collision, and as a result of which both of them will get -20, -20. So this is what happened with Galwan. We stood firm against China. The other states, US, Australia, and Japan supported us. South China Rim nation supported us. Nepal went closer to China, but Prime Minister Oli faced heat domestically. Raksha Mantri went to Russia. Air Force was further strengthened. Ground forces near LAC were further fortified. Corps commander level negotiations were on. And most important, the Prime Minister went to the LAC forward areas, and that showed a resolve that come what may, India will not move aside. And that is the time China moved aside, the other guy blinked, and the negotiations were fructified. So this is again which shows that if we remain steadfast, depending upon the situation, and show that we are going to remain steadfast, then there is some way out which we can project. Now, this is another game which is Wimp and Macho. In this kind of a game, what happens is that the similar kind of a payoff, but this is an evolutionary stable game in the sense that both of them do not have a choice whether to move aside or not, but they are sort of genetically ingrained into themselves whether to be Wimp and Macho, and see the population of Wimp and Macho. In this kind of a game, you can see evolutionary population game that as there are more number of wimps, it pays to become a macho, and if there are more number of machos, it pays to become a wimp. So at this point of time, as there are more number of wimps, it will pay to become macho, and therefore more and more balancing is what India must do at this point of time. Then this is another game which is also called hawk and dove game. What is happening here is in this game, V is what you get and C is what you lost. So if both of them are wimps, then the probability being 0.5 of each of one of them moving aside, the payoff is V minus C by 2 and V minus C by 2. Macho V or 0, macho and wimp 0 and V, and both of them are macho. The payoff will be V by 2 and V by 2. What is interesting to note here is that C is the loss which they will have if both of them collide. and V is the benefit that they get. Now, if V is greater than C, then the game is like prisoner's dilemma. That means defection will pay. What we have to see to it, using our strategy, is that V, the gain that you get is less than C, that is the cost incurred. And that is the time this will be a chicken's game, and therefore there will not be any collision. And there will not be any defection, moreover. So what is important for us here to see is that in case of any misadventure, we must be able to impose terrible costs on the adversary. What do we mean by terrible cost? If China settles down a village in Bhutan, can we cross LAC and settle down a village in China? If China moves swiftly and takes Taiwan, can we with same alacrity liberate either Hong Kong or Tibet? I doubt. I don't know. But if we balance properly, then this may happen. And with strong allies, we may be able to impose unacceptable cost, which will act as a deterrent. And this deterrent requires a lot of balancing and quality. Now, supposing if we take joint action with alacrity, what do we see here? Supposing there is India and there is US, they want to take joint action. What is the worst thing that happened to India is inaction. India will have one, and both having inaction will be 1 and 2. Both of them will have a very low payoff. But the worst thing that can happen to India is taking action on its own. And only if India takes action and US does not take action, then US gains and India's payoff is only 2. If US takes action and India does not take action, then India's payoff is 4 and US payoff is 1. So the worst thing for India is both of them taking inaction. Worst thing for US is US only taking an action and nobody else takes action. So it is better for US not to take action and let somebody else take action like India. Now, this is where the strategy comes into picture. India should make US take an action and India can improve the payoff by if both of them take action. US action will be reduced if only US takes action. So India has to send a very clear message to US or any other ally that we will not act if you do not act, but we will definitely act if you act. And this is very, very important. If coordinated action with an particular speed and swiftness, and if all of them take action in case of any eventuality, the effort will be worth it. And therefore, it is important for us to see here that we send a clear message that we will not act if you do not act, but we will definitely act if you act. Now, when we are talking about this, by act, we do not necessarily mean that military option. We should not be theater-centric. We can look at a whole lot of actions. We can look at trade, we can look at economy, we can look at legal processes, but anyway, the action has to be there when the time comes, and that has to be a coordinated action. And therefore, when you're talking about coordinated action, this is my 8-point star, 4 S and 4 O's, S connecting with O's. And this is what is a framework that I propose to be used for coordinated joint action. We should have, first of all, a shared value. The value, not all values have to match, but supposing a value like propagating democracy is a value, and this is what we consider is more important, then there has to be a coordinated action, and therefore we require a shared value. That shared value will give us certain objectives. The objectives have to be clearly communicated, and from there strategy emerges. The strategy will tell you what kind of an organization, a joint action, for example, is required. That organization will require certain skills. The skills will give us an orientation. That orientation has to be systematized. And that systematic approach will give us operational capability. And that operational capability we have to reflect upon in terms of shared value. So this 8-point star, from shared value to objective to strategy to organization to skills to orientation to system to operationality to shared value, is the framework that we should use for a joint action of any kind. And this is how the Quad architecture needs to be, in my opinion. Thank you very much.